My sister Vanessa tilted her champagne flute and let out a short, practiced laugh. The sound cut through the soft jazz playing across the botanical garden. She leaned against the head table and looked at my wedding dress. "After all these years, you are still just a gardener." A few guests standing nearby shifted their weight. My mother Helen stepped closer to Vanessa and smiled. She adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "At least Mark has a real career in finance," my mother said. "Bradley is building a legacy with his real estate firm. You should ask him for business advice, Aaliyah." I did not raise my voice. I did not throw my drink. I held my glass of ice water and felt the condensation dampening my fingers. I was 33 years old, and I had spent the last decade learning that arguing with my family was like pouring water into a leaking bucket. I took a sip. Before I could decide whether to walk away, a man stepped into our small circle. The scent of expensive cologne cut through the heavy Alabama humidity. My mother recognized him instantly. Richard Sterling owned half the commercial property in the state. She straightened her posture and touched Bradley on the shoulder, ready to introduce her son-in-law. Richard did not look at Bradley. He looked straight at me and opened his arms. "There you are, Aaliyah," he said. "My wife still talks about the estate you designed for us. Every time we walk through the terrace, she mentions your name." My mother lowered her hand. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You work for him?" she asked. Richard turned to her and let out a deep, booming laugh. "Work for me? I waited 9 months just to get her to take my project. She is the best landscape architect in the South." Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask how old you are and where you are listening from today. Drop your age in the comments below, because what I thought was just a petty family insult turned out to be the cover-up for a crime. Stay with me, because the look on my sister's face was not just embarrassment. Welcome to Grape Vengeance. If you enjoy stories where toxic families run into hard evidence, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the rest of this story. The silence that followed Richard Sterling's laugh was thick. Vanessa gripped her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles turned white. Bradley stood beside her, looking like a man who had just missed a train. He stared at Richard, and then he stared at me. I thanked Richard for coming. I asked about his wife, and we exchanged polite conversation for 2 minutes while my family stood frozen. When Richard finally excused himself to find his table, I turned back to my sister. She did not say a word about gardening. She turned around and walked toward the bar. I watched her walk away. The satisfaction of proving them wrong lasted for exactly 5 seconds. Then a colder thought replaced it. I knew my own wedding seating chart. I had designed it myself. I had placed Richard Sterling at table 9 with a group of corporate clients. He should not have been walking past the head table from the direction of table 4. Table 4 was where Vanessa and Bradley were seated. I looked across the ballroom. The place card with Richard's name was resting perfectly beside Bradley's empty chair. I did not confront them. I walked quietly to the bridal suite and locked the door behind me. I opened my phone and logged into my event management application. My family thought I was just playing in the dirt. They were about to learn that I tracked every single detail. The heavy wooden door of the bridal suite clicked shut, locking the noise of the reception outside. I slid the brass deadbolt into place and stood in the center of the quiet room. The faint thumping of the bass guitar from the live band vibrated through the floorboards beneath my feet. I did not sit down on the velvet sofa. I did not pace across the rug. I pulled my phone from my purse and stared at the glowing screen. My event management application loaded instantly. I bypassed the catering schedules and the floral delivery timelines. I scrolled directly to the digital guest layout. I had spent 3 weeks arranging the seating for this night. In my profession as a landscape architect, I design estates down to the exact millimeter of soil and stone. I treat my personal events with the same level of precision. Every detail matters. I had placed Richard Sterling at Table 9. Table 9 was positioned near the garden terrace doors, surrounded by my corporate clients and a few local art gallery owners. I put him there because those people matched his energy and respected his privacy. I dragged my finger across the screen to Table 4. My stomach muscles tightened. The digital map confirmed what my eyes had seen in the ballroom. Richard Sterling was listed next to Bradley. Vanessa never did anything by accident. Growing up, she would borrow my belongings and ruin them, then claim she made a simple mistake in the dark. She would fail to invite me to family dinners and blame a glitch in the group chat settings. My mother Helen always defended her. Helen called Vanessa spontaneous and free-spirited, while calling me rigid and obsessed with rules. I accepted the label because being rigid kept my business profitable and my life peaceful. But moving a billionaire guest at my wedding was not a spontaneous mistake. It required accessing the vendor portal. I tapped the administrator panel on the application. My software is designed for securing high-net-worth property layouts, so the logging features are robust and unforgiving. Every time someone views or alters a document, the system records a footprint. I opened the version history for the seating chart. A new line of code populated the screen. The last modification occurred yesterday at 11 at night. While I was sitting at my rehearsal dinner, smiling and thanking my guests, someone logged in using the read-only portal link I had sent to the bridal party. They bypassed the standard view and used a backdoor administrative login I had set up for the wedding planner. I clicked the timestamp. The system generated a numerical IP address for the user making the unauthorized change. I opened a mobile browser and ran a standard location trace on the numbers. The screen populated with a digital map of the surrounding city blocks. A blue dot pinned itself directly over the Oak Ridge Boutique Hotel. That was where my mother and sister were staying for the weekend. I knew this because I had paid for their suite. I stared at the blue dot on my screen. The pieces of the puzzle snapped together with a cold, mechanical precision. Vanessa did not just happen to sit next to Richard Sterling. She put him there. She manipulated my wedding layout to corner one of the wealthiest real estate developers in the state of Alabama. Bradley ran a development firm that always seemed to be chasing the next big break. They drove luxury cars and leased a huge house in a gated neighborhood. But Vanessa constantly complained about cash flow. She was always hinting that they were just one major investor away from dominating the market. Cornering Richard was not just casual networking. It was a calculated ambush. They were using my wedding reception as a free pitch room to save their failing image. The insult at the head table suddenly made perfect sense. Calling my career a joke in front of everyone was a smokescreen. They wanted to humiliate me so I would stay far away from Table 4. They needed me too angry or too embarrassed to interrupt them while Bradley worked his way into Richard's pockets. My first instinct was to march back into the ballroom. I wanted to walk up to Table 4 and pull the chair out from under Bradley. I wanted to expose the lie right in front of the centerpieces. But confronting them would give Vanessa exactly what she wanted. She would cry and say she just wanted to sit near a family friend. Helen would jump in and say I was overreacting and trying to ruin my own celebration over a silly seating mistake. They would turn the narrative against me in front of my guests. I refused to play their game. Justice does not happen in screaming matches. It happens in the documentation. I held down the buttons on my phone and took a screenshot of the modified seating chart, showing the exact placement of Richard's chair next to Bradley. The camera clicked. I took another screenshot of the administrative timestamp, showing the change was made at 11 at night. The camera clicked again. I took a third screenshot of the IP location trace, hovering over the Oak Ridge Boutique Hotel. I opened my secure cloud drive and created a new folder. I typed the words "Wedding Evidence" into the title bar. I uploaded the images and watched the progress bar fill until the files were safely stored on a remote server. the physical feeling of betrayal mixed with a sharp clarity. My family had viewed my wedding not as a celebration, but as an opportunity to extract wealth. I slipped my phone back into my purse, feeling a strange sense of calm settling over me. The betrayal was documented. I could let Bradley make a fool of himself trying to pitch a billionaire who hated being bothered at social events. I turned toward the vanity mirror to check my appearance before returning to the party. I smoothed the front of my dress and fixed a loose pin in my hair. I was ready to walk out the door and enjoy my night. That was when I looked at the small metal safe sitting in the corner of the bridal suite. The heavy steel door was shut, but the digital keypad was illuminated. I walked slowly across the carpeted floor toward the corner of the room. My heart rate stayed steady and deliberate. My work tablet was not just a device for sending emails. It was the central hub for my entire landscape architecture firm. It contained unreleased blueprints. It held three-dimensional renderings of private estates. It stored proprietary layouts for clients who demanded absolute secrecy. People like Richard Sterling trusted me because my security protocols were unbreakable. I crouched down in front of the metal box. The green light blinked twice, indicating a successful entry code had been used earlier in the day. Only 3 people knew the master code for the suite: me, my husband Mark, and my mother Helen. Mark had been with the groomsmen all day. I reached out and pulled the handle. The heavy door swung open smoothly. My breath caught in my throat. The tablet was still inside, sitting on the velvet lining, but the leather cover was folded back. I never leave the cover open. The battery indicator light was pulsing. The device was awake. The ambush in the ballroom was not the only thing my family had planned for today. I stared at the glowing battery indicator. My pulse drummed a steady rhythm against my eardrums. I reached out and lifted the device from the velvet lining of the safe. The metal chassis felt warm against my palm. A tablet does not retain heat if it has been asleep since the early morning. I pressed my thumb against the biometric sensor located at the bottom of the screen. The home display materialized. I did not waste time checking mundane applications. I navigated directly into the system settings and opened the battery usage analytics dashboard. The graph on the screen displayed a sharp vertical spike in device activity. The tablet had been active for exactly 45 minutes today. I tapped the specific bar on the graph to reveal the time block. The screen displayed 1 o'clock to 1:45 in the afternoon. At 1 o'clock, I was standing beside the botanical garden reflection pool taking bridal portraits. I had handed my personal phone to my maid of honor, but I made sure to lock this work device inside the hotel suite safe. Mark was on the opposite side of the grounds, wrangling his groomsmen. The suite was supposed to be completely empty. I scrolled down to the application activity log to see exactly what had occupied that 45-minute window. The photo gallery remained untouched. The email client showed 0 minutes of engagement. The web browser had not been opened. Only one application registered any active usage: my proprietary drafting software. My breathing slowed. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. This program was not a generic drawing application. It was a custom encrypted platform I commissioned to render 3-dimensional estate layouts. The files stored inside contained topography maps, security camera placements, and structural blueprints for clients who demanded absolute confidentiality. Richard Sterling's central pavilion design lived inside that specific folder. The file included intricate schematics for his infinity edge pool structural retaining walls and a terraced garden that required 3 months of soil engineering to develop. These were not simple sketches. They were fully realized construction documents. The folder also held architectural layouts for a federal judge's retirement compound and a private island retreat for a tech executive. These individuals paid my firm 7 figures precisely because I guaranteed their privacy. A data breach could result in millions of dollars in liability and the immediate destruction of my career. I needed to know how the intruder bypassed my security. I tapped the system access log. A secondary backup passcode had been utilized to open the device. The code consisted of 6 digits. It was the phone number of my childhood home. I only kept that code active in case my biometric scanner failed on a job site. Only my mother knew I still used that specific numerical sequence for emergency overrides. I required irrefutable proof before preparing any legal response. I pulled my personal mobile phone from my purse and opened the boutique hotel concierge application. Because I had reserved and paid for the entire bridal block using my corporate account, the system granted me master tenant access to the digital locks. I navigated to the security log from my specific suite. The software displayed a spinning loading wheel for a few seconds before listing every entry and exit with corresponding digital keycard assignments. At 12:55 in the afternoon, a keycard had unlocked my door. I tapped the entry to reveal the registered user. The name Helen Wilson populated the screen in plain gray text. I lowered the phone and let my hands rest on my lap. The physical sensation of betrayal moved through my chest like a cold weight. Helen had not just sneered at my career during the wedding toast. She had actively facilitated a corporate data breach while I was outside smiling for a photographer. She had walked into my private suite, unlocked my safe, and handed my intellectual property over to Vanessa. Growing up, Helen never viewed my interest in botany and architecture as a legitimate path. She pushed Vanessa into business school and praised Bradley's real estate ventures, regardless of how many times his projects failed. When I landed my first major commercial contract designing a corporate campus, Helen called it a nice little landscaping gig. She refused to acknowledge the scale of my firm because acknowledging my success meant admitting Vanessa was falling behind. Vanessa possessed a long history of taking shortcuts. In high school, she would steal my essays and submit them under her name. In college, she borrowed my car without asking and returned it with a damaged bumper, claiming a shopping cart hit it. Helen always defended her. Helen called Vanessa spontaneous and free-spirited, while labeling me rigid and obsessed with rules. I accepted the rigid label because being meticulous kept my business profitable and my life peaceful. But accessing proprietary blueprints was not a spontaneous sibling mistake. It was a calculated felony. Bradley ran a development firm that struggled to secure permits, let alone luxury clients. They were stealing my hard work to prop up his failing facade. I did not drop to the floor and cry. I did not run out to the dance floor to scream at my mother. Emotional outbursts offer toxic people the opportunity to call you crazy. I needed a mechanism to prove the theft without speaking a single word. Justice in the corporate world relies on documentation. I sat down on the edge of the velvet sofa, smoothing the heavy silk of my wedding gown so it would not wrinkle. I opened the drafting software on the tablet and accessed the remote cloud server connection. I typed in my administrator credentials. Every rendering stored on this device synchronized with my primary workstation back at my main office. I navigated to the Advanced Security Protocol menu. 3 years ago, a rival contractor attempted to pass off my garden schematics as his own work during a municipal bidding process. After that incident, I hired a cybersecurity developer to build a latent tracking feature directly into my drafting program. I selected the master folder containing all my recent client designs. I scrolled past the file names until I found the specific rendering for Richard Sterling's luxury eco-community project. I tapped the file properties and checked a small box labeled Activate Embedded Identifiers. The system prompted me to confirm the security override. I pressed Accept. The software immediately began weaving a digital watermark into the core coding of the visual files. This was not a simple logo placed in the corner of a document. It was an invisible overlay integrated directly into the three-dimensional rendering itself. On a standard tablet screen, The blueprints looked completely normal. A user scrolling through the images would see nothing out of the ordinary. The colors remained vibrant and the lines remained sharp. But if someone attempted to project those images, cast them to a separate monitor, or export them for a formal presentation, the hidden layer would trigger. The software would force my company insignia to display across the entire design in large, undeniable text. It would permanently brand the rendering with the words Wilson Estate Designs. A green checkmark appeared on the screen, indicating the synchronization was complete. Anyone viewing the stolen files currently cached on their own devices would have no idea the trap had been armed. The update pushed through silently via the cloud connection. I needed to see the full scope of the breach. I reviewed the document export log to see exactly what Vanessa had taken. At 1:20 in the afternoon, a compressed folder containing the Sterling estate designs had been transferred via local wireless sharing. The destination device was named Vanessa's phone. She had taken the entire portfolio, including the unreleased budget projections. I closed the drafting application and locked the tablet. I wiped the glass screen clean with the edge of a microfiber cloth I kept in my purse, removing any trace of my fingerprints. I placed the device back onto the velvet lining of the metal box and shut the heavy door. The electronic lock engaged with a sharp, mechanical click. My family believed they had stolen my blueprints to secure a multi-million-dollar investment. They believed they were walking into a pitch meeting armed with the best designs in the state. They did not realize they were holding a ticking time bomb. I stood up and checked my reflection in the full-length mirror one final time. My makeup remained flawless. My posture was straight. I picked up my room key and my phone. I needed to return to the reception and watch the events unfold. But as I placed my hand on the brass doorknob, a memory surfaced. I needed to understand exactly why Vanessa was desperate enough to commit corporate espionage on my wedding day. My mind drifted back to a quiet conversation I had overheard just 48 hours ago at the rehearsal dinner. The cool brass doorknob of the bridal suite rested against my palm. I kept my hand there and closed my eyes for a single heartbeat. The glowing battery indicator on the locked tablet behind me proved this was not a spontaneous crime of opportunity. People do not commit corporate espionage at a wedding reception on a whim. They commit felonies when they are backed into a corner with nowhere else to hide. The foundation for this exact betrayal had been poured precisely 48 hours ago. The memory surfaced with sharp clarity. It was Friday evening. We were hosting the rehearsal dinner at an upscale, oak-paneled steakhouse downtown. I had excused myself from the main dining room to settle the final beverage invoice at the front host stand. The sounds of my groomsmen laughing and crystal glasses clinking echoed down the long corridor. I handed my corporate card to the manager, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. Then the heavy velvet curtain separating the lobby from the dining area shifted. My mother stepped through the fabric. Helen wore a tailored silver dress she claimed to have purchased on sale, though I recognized the high-end designer label. She carried a stiff leather handbag. Her jaw was set in that familiar, rigid line, indicating she demanded compliance. She did not offer a compliment about the dinner. She did not ask if I felt excited about the upcoming ceremony. She marched directly to the host stand, waited for the manager to step away, and slapped a folded piece of white paper onto the mahogany counter. "Pay this," she demanded. Her voice stayed low, but the tone was absolute. I looked down at the paper. It was a printed folio from the Oak Ridge Boutique Hotel. The final balance read $3,200. It was the invoice for the luxury penthouse suite Vanessa and Bradley had booked for the weekend. I had already paid for standard rooms for the entire bridal party months in advance. Vanessa had secretly upgraded herself to the top floor and charged the difference to the credit card Helen had placed on file. I slid the paper back across the polished wood. I am not paying for an upgrade I did not authorize. My voice remained level. I established the budget for this weekend 6 months ago, and I am sticking to it. Helen crossed her arms. Her eyes narrowed, taking in my tailored blazer and the diamond engagement ring on my left hand. Mark works in high-level finance, Alia. He manages corporate wealth. You two possess more than enough disposable income to cover a simple hotel bill for your own sister. I did not correct her assumption. I did not tell her that my landscape architecture firm generated triple the annual revenue of Mark's financial portfolio. Letting my family believe my husband served as the sole breadwinner remained a strategic choice. It kept their greed focused on a man who knew how to say no rather than harassing my private business accounts. You act entirely unreasonable, Helen continued. Bradley works as a visionary entrepreneur. He is building a real estate empire. He cannot tie up his liquid capital in trivial travel expenses right now. You just play in the dirt. You plant bushes for a living. You have no idea what real corporate pressure looks like. Mark understands high-stakes business. Just put the hotel on his card and we can forget this ever happened. I studied my mother. I analyzed the deep lines around her mouth and the frantic, nervous energy radiating from her posture. She was not just asking for a wedding favor. She was demanding a financial bailout. My financial boundaries remain closed for negotiation, I said. I will cover the standard room rate I promised. The remaining balance belongs to Vanessa. A sharp intake of breath sounded from the hallway. Vanessa emerged from the shadows near the coat check. She had been eavesdropping the entire time. She stomped across the marble floor. She wore a silk dress that looked expensive from a distance, but up close, the hem showed fraying threads. Her knuckles appeared bone-white as she clutched a designer purse that I easily identified as a cheap replica. You act so selfish, Aaliyah. Vanessa spat the words. Her voice shook with a high-pitched intensity that did not match a simple hotel bill dispute. We just face a temporary cash flow bottleneck. Bradley's firm sits on the verge of a massive, confidential breakthrough. We are securing a development deal that will make your little gardening company look like a joke. I did not argue with her insults. I watched her body language. The signs of deep financial distress were written all over her frame. Her breathing came out shallow and erratic. A thin layer of sweat gathered at her hairline, despite the freezing air conditioning pumping into the lobby. Her eyes darted toward the dining room where Bradley sat drinking heavily, then darted back to me. She was terrified. When a successful business experiences a cash flow bottleneck, the owners do not panic over a $3,000 hotel charge. They simply transfer funds from a reserve account. Vanessa's reaction was disproportionate. It was raw, unfiltered panic. You should support family, Vanessa sneered. Bradley meets with a top-tier investor this weekend. He needs to project success. He needs that penthouse suite to host a preliminary breakfast meeting. If you ruin this deal for us because you hoard your husband's money, I will never forgive you. I kept my expression completely neutral. I am not responsible for funding Bradley's business meetings, I replied. I turned my back on both of them, signed the catering receipt the manager handed me, and walked back into the rehearsal dinner. I left the hotel invoice sitting on the mahogany host stand. The memory dissolved. I stood in the present, inside my quiet bridal suite. The heavy thumping bass of the reception music pulled me back to reality. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating clarity. The missing money at the rehearsal dinner, the frantic defense of Bradley's imaginary real estate empire, the unauthorized seating chart modification, and finally the stolen encrypted blueprints from my safe. Bradley did not just want to network with Richard Sterling. Bradley was broke. His firm was drowning. He needed emergency funding to save himself from total financial ruin. But a billionaire like Richard does not hand over capital without seeing tangible assets. Bradley possessed no assets. He held no successful developments, so Vanessa and Helen stole mine. They downloaded my proprietary three-dimensional renderings. They took the architectural blueprints for the luxury eco-community I had spent 6 months designing. Bradley planned to load those files onto his own device and present them to Richard as his own work. He intended to use my multi-million-dollar intellectual property as fraudulent collateral to secure an investment check. My family proved willing to destroy my professional reputation to cover up their own financial collapse. If Richard believed Bradley created those designs and invested money based on that lie, the federal government could implicate me in corporate fraud. They were not just stealing pictures. They were stealing my livelihood and risking my freedom. I turned the brass doorknob and pulled the door open. The hallway stretched out before me, illuminated by soft wall sconces. I stepped out of the suite and let the door lock securely behind me. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger functions as a chaotic emotion that clouds judgment. I felt a cold, absolute certainty. The trap I had set on the cloud server was armed and waiting. The invisible digital watermarks were already embedded deep within the core coding of the rendering files Bradley currently held. I walked down the carpeted corridor toward the main ballroom. The music grew louder with every step. I passed a catering server carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes. I offered a polite nod. I adjusted the train of my dress, ensuring the white fabric fell perfectly across the floorboards. I looked like a bride returning from a brief moment of rest. Nobody could see the executioner hiding beneath the silk. I reached the double doors of the reception hall. The room glowed with warm, golden light. Laughter and conversation filled the air. I scanned the crowd instantly. I did not look at the dance floor. I did not look at the cake table. My eyes swept the perimeter of the room, searching for my husband. Mark stood near the terrace doors, talking with his college roommates. He held a glass of bourbon. I caught his gaze across the room. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. Mark knew me better than anyone. He recognized the shift in my posture. He excused himself from his friends and began moving through the crowd toward the bar area. I turned my attention to the opposite side of the venue. I located table 4. It sat completely empty. Vanessa and Helen were nowhere to be seen. I followed the sightline toward the private bar alcove tucked away in the back corner of the event space. The lighting remained dimmer there, designed for quiet conversations away from the band. Bradley stood in the center of the alcove. He had Richard Sterling cornered against the mahogany bar counter. Bradley held a digital tablet in his left hand, gesturing wildly with his right. His face looked flushed red with excitement and desperation. Helen stood a few feet away, beaming with artificial pride. Vanessa hovered right behind Bradley, watching Richard with hungry, desperate eyes. They had isolated their target. The ambush was in full swing. Bradley was currently pitching my stolen eco-community designs to a billionaire who had actually commissioned them. The poachers had proudly carried a stolen trophy directly into the lion's den. I took a deep breath and began walking toward the alcove. It was time to watch them pull the trigger on their own destruction. I navigated the edge of the dance floor. The band transitioned into a slow rhythm, and couples drifted toward the center of the room. I used the shifting crowd as a shield. I moved past the towering floral centerpieces until I reached the shadow of a large marble pillar near the bar alcove. I stood perfectly still. Bradley had Richard backed against the polished brass railing. He tapped the glass surface of the stolen tablet. His voice rose above the low hum of the reception. He sounded rehearsed but breathless. A man trying to sell a bridge he did not own. "We are focusing on sustainable integration," Bradley said. He swiped to a new slide. "This is our flagship concept, a luxury residential enclave built directly into the natural elevation of the valley. We preserve the old-growth trees and use them as natural privacy barriers between the estates." I listened to my own project summary coming out of his mouth. He had memorized the executive overview I included in the root folder. He delivered the words with hollow enthusiasm. Richard held a glass of neat scotch. His posture remained relaxed, but his eyes looked bored. In his world, men like Bradley approached him every single day. Men seeking handouts disguised as revolutionary business proposals. Richard took a slow sip of his drink, offering a polite, non-committal nod. Helen stood 2 steps behind Bradley. She beamed. Her posture screamed validation. For years, my mother had bragged to her country club friends about Bradley's supposed genius. She ignored his string of failed strip mall investments and his habit of dodging calls from creditors. She needed him to succeed, so her narrative about Vanessa marrying a titan of industry would finally become true. Watching him pitch a titan in real life fueled her delusion. Vanessa leaned against a high-top table nearby. She chewed the inside of her cheek. Her eyes darted between Richard's face and the tablet screen. She did not care about sustainable integration. She cared about the deposit check they desperately needed to stop the bank from seizing their house. I felt a gaze land on me. I shifted my focus across the room. Mark stood near the entrance of the outdoor patio. He held a glass of bourbon in his left hand. His tailored tuxedo caught the dim light. In the financial sector, Mark evaluated corporate acquisitions and assessed risk. He spent his days dismantling bad investments and exposing fraudulent ledgers. He recognized the tension near the bar immediately. He looked at Bradley, then looked at me standing behind the marble pillar. I gave him a single, sharp nod. Mark understood the silent command. An older uncle from my father's side of the family started stumbling toward the bar, demanding another round of drinks. Mark smoothly intercepted him. He threw an arm around the uncle's shoulder, laughed at a joke, and steered him gently toward the opposite side of the reception hall. Mark secured the perimeter. He made sure nobody interrupted the execution. I turned my attention back to the alcove. I needed to let Bradley finish. If I stepped forward right now and snatched the device from his hands, Vanessa would spin a new story by morning. She would claim Bradley was merely asking a mentor for friendly advice on a generic housing concept. Helen would accuse me of embarrassing the family over a minor misunderstanding. They would paint me as a bitter sister destroying their golden opportunity out of sheer jealousy. I refused to leave them any room to maneuver. I needed Bradley to firmly commit to the fraud. I needed him to claim ownership of the assets on the record, in front of a witness who commanded enough power to destroy him. Bradley swiped to the next rendering. The screen glowed, illuminating the sharp angles of his face. "This is the central pavilion," Bradley said. He pointed at the digital image. "We engineered a cascading infinity pool that filters runoff water directly into a subterranean irrigation system. My team spent a year analyzing the soil composition just to make this retaining wall feasible. That specific retaining wall had cost me countless sleepless nights. I had flown in a structural engineer from Colorado to verify the load-bearing capacity of the limestone foundation. Bradley could not even balance a standard checking account. Richard stopped swirling his scotch. The ice cubes clinked against the crystal glass and then fell silent. He lowered his drink. He tilted his head slightly. The bored, polite expression vanished from his features. A sharp, calculating intensity replaced it. He stared at the glowing screen. "Let me see that," Richard said. His voice dropped an octave. It sounded low and dangerous. Bradley handed the tablet over with a triumphant grin. He thought he had hooked his fish. He puffed out his chest and shot a smug glance back at Vanessa. She let out a soft exhale of relief. Helen clasped her hands together, resting them under her chin like she was watching a miracle unfold. Richard held the device in both hands. He used his thumb and index finger to zoom in on the topography map. He studied the curvature of the access road leading up to the main terrace. He scrutinized the placement of the solar arrays disguised along the roofline of the guest house. "This terrain mapping is highly specific," Richard murmured. He did not look up from the screen. The gradient on the southern slope requires a specialized retaining grid. Who did you say developed this layout for your firm? Bradley did not hesitate. He stepped right into the snare. I spearheaded the design myself, Bradley boasted. I directed my internal architectural team. We built the concept from the ground up over the last 12 months. We own all the proprietary rights to the schematics. He lied with staggering ease. He claimed my labor, my engineering, and my intellectual property as his own personal achievement. Richard swiped to the next image in the portfolio. It was the three-dimensional fly-through rendering of the estate gardens. He traced a finger along the digital pathway lined with imported Japanese maples. "And you are seeking capital to break ground?" Richard asked. "Exactly," Bradley said. He leaned closer, smelling the money. "We possess the land rights, but we require an influx of capital to initiate the grading process. If we can secure a signature on a letter of intent by Monday morning, my firm is prepared to offer you an exclusive equity stake." A letter of intent. Bradley was trying to secure a binding financial commitment based on stolen blueprints. That crossed the line from a desperate family lie into federal wire fraud. Richard stopped swiping. He stared at the final slide. A long, dense silence stretched over the bar alcove. The jazz band played a lively tune in the background, but the air around the men felt suffocatingly still. Helen stepped forward, unable to contain her excitement. "Bradley is a visionary, Mr. Sterling. You will not find a more dedicated developer in the entire region. He works tirelessly." Richard finally lifted his eyes from the glowing screen. He looked at Helen. Then he looked at Bradley. His expression was impossible to read. It was a mask of pure corporate evaluation. I watched from the shadows of the marble pillar. My breathing remained steady. My heart beat with a slow, calm rhythm. The trap was fully loaded. The bait had been swallowed. Richard tapped the screen one more time. He zoomed in on the bottom right corner of the three-dimensional garden layout. He held the tablet up so the screen faced Bradley. A faint flicker of blue light pulsed across the display. I stepped out from behind the pillar and walked slowly toward the alcove. The time for observing had ended. The time for dismantling had arrived. The distance between the marble pillar and the bar alcove measured perhaps 20 feet. I walked with measured, deliberate steps. The rustle of my silk dress went unnoticed under the noise of the reception. Richard held the tablet up toward the dim lighting of the corner. The faint blue glow illuminated the sharp lines of his face. His thumb swiped downward across the screen, triggering the hidden security layer I had activated from the suite. The visual rendering on the display shuddered for a fraction of a second. Then the invisible code executed its command. A bold watermark stamped itself across the digital terrain. The text stretched from the top of the virtual retaining wall down to the bottom of the cascading infinity pool. The letters formed a distinct, undeniable logo. Wilson Estate Designs. Bradley leaned closer, peering at the screen. His smug expression faltered. He squinted as if trying to comprehend a foreign language. He reached out to take the device back, but Richard pulled it out of his grasp. Richard built his fortune on securing intellectual property. In his early career, he spent a decade in civil courts dismantling rival developers who attempted to copy his proprietary zoning strategies. He despised thieves, and he despised liars even more. He recognized stolen assets the moment he saw them. He did not politely hand the device over. He rotated the screen outward so the glowing watermark faced Bradley directly. Richard did not whisper. A man possessing his level of wealth and influence never worries about maintaining social decorum when confronting fraud. His voice boomed. The deep baritone sliced right through the ambient chatter and the soft rhythm of the jazz band. "These are Aaliyah's designs," Richard stated. Bradley froze. His hands dropped to his sides. He opened his mouth but produced zero sound. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very small. "You did not develop this concept." Richard continued, his volume increasing. "You stole this material from the bride." The word "stole" rang out across the venue. The bartender working the mahogany counter stopped pouring a drink. A server carrying a tray of appetizers halted in her tracks. The conversation at the nearest guest table ceased. The sudden quiet acted like a vacuum, pulling the attention of the entire room toward the back corner. The band leader noticed the shifting atmosphere and signaled the musicians to stop playing. The music faded into a heavy, suffocating silence. 200 guests turned their heads to watch the alcove. Bradley stood paralyzed. His eyes darted toward the exit, then back to the glowing tablet. He had banked his entire financial survival on this single pitch, and the ground had just opened up beneath his feet. He had nothing prepared for this scenario. Vanessa reacted differently. She scrambled to control the damage. Her survival instinct always involved bending the truth until it fit her needs. In college, she failed a group marketing seminar because she refused to do her share of the work. When the professor confronted her, she claimed the other students excluded her from the planning meetings and cried until she received a passing grade. She excelled at playing the victim while pretending to be a team player. She lunged forward and inserted herself between Bradley and Richard. She forced a bright plastic smile onto her face. A high, nervous laugh escaped her throat. "Richard, please," Vanessa said. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pushed the fake enthusiasm harder. "This is just a simple family collaboration. Aaliyah and Bradley share ideas all the time. We are blending his real estate expertise with her landscaping hobby to create something special. It is a joint venture." She reached out to place a hand on Richard's arm, hoping to charm him into compliance. Richard took a step back, avoiding her touch. He stared at her with a look of pure disgust. I stepped into the clearing. The guests parted for me. My white dress gleamed under the chandeliers. I walked past the silent tables and stopped right beside Richard. I did not look at him. I locked my gaze directly onto my sister. I did not yell. A calm, factual delivery cuts deeper than any emotional outburst. Shouting allows the other person to call you irrational. Facts leave them nowhere to run. "We are not collaborating, Vanessa," I said. My voice carried clearly across the silent room. Her fake smile shattered. Her jaw dropped slightly, and her eyes widened in genuine panic. She took a tiny step backward, bumping into Bradley's shoulder. "You accessed my secure files at 1:15 this afternoon," I continued. The words landed like heavy stones dropping into a quiet pond. "I monitored the network. I hold the digital entry logs. I possess the timestamps showing exactly when you bypassed my security protocols and transferred my proprietary blueprints to your personal device." The silence in the ballroom deepened. The guests absorbed the severity of the accusation. This was not a dispute over a spilled drink or a ruined toast. The bride had just indicted her own sister for corporate theft in front of a billionaire. Bradley tried to speak. "Aaliyah, listen," he stammered, his voice cracked. "We just wanted to present a unified family front. We thought we could secure the capital and bring you in on the deal later." I turned my focus to him. I felt zero pity for the man sweating through his expensive tuxedo. "You do not secure capital with someone else's property, Bradley," I replied, presenting my unreleased architectural renderings to an investor and claiming them as your own constitutes fraud. "You used my wedding reception to run a scam." Richard nodded slowly. He tapped the edge of the tablet against his palm. He looked at Bradley with an expression devoid of any professional respect. "You pitched me stolen collateral," Richard said. His tone sounded deadly and flat. "You tried to leverage the bride's intellectual property to solicit a blind investment. I will make sure every developer in this state knows exactly how your firm operates by tomorrow morning." Bradley swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. He looked physically ill. The reality of his situation crashed over him. His firm was already failing, and now the most powerful real estate mogul in the region had promised to blacklist him permanently. Vanessa let out a sharp gasp. She realized the charm offensive had failed. The fake collaboration story was dead. The proof sat locked inside the digital access logs and the glowing watermark shining on the screen. The public humiliation she had tried to inflict on me an hour earlier had boomeranged and struck her with devastating force. She stood exposed in front of our extended family, my corporate clients, and the friends who had gathered to celebrate my marriage. I looked at the people watching us. My groomsmen stood near the patio doors, watching with hard expressions. My colleagues from the design industry whispered to one another, exchanging shocked glances. They understood the gravity of stealing unreleased blueprints. I turned back to the alcove. I reached out and took the tablet from Richard's hands. He surrendered it willingly. I pressed the power button, turning the screen dark. I tucked the device firmly under my arm. "I think this pitch is over," I said. I did not need to say anything else. The verdict had been delivered. I watched Vanessa fold her arms across her chest, shrinking away from the stares of the crowd. Bradley wiped a layer of sweat from his forehead. They had brought a lie into the light, and the light had burned them down to the foundation. But a toxic family structure rarely collapses after a single strike. When the golden child faces undeniable accountability, the enabler always steps in to shield them from the consequences. My mother Helen pushed her way through the front row of onlookers. Her face was flushed dark red. She marched into the center of the alcove, ignoring Richard, ignoring the silent guests, and focusing all her furious energy directly onto me. She was ready to rewrite reality to save her favorite daughter. Helen clamped her hand around my wrist. Her acrylic nails dug into my skin through the sheer lace of my sleeves. The grip felt tight and desperate. She pulled me away from the bar alcove, dragging me toward the dimly lit corridor leading to the venue kitchens. I allowed her to lead me because I wanted her words isolated from the remaining guests. I did not want my colleagues hearing the pathetic excuses she was about to deliver. She shoved me slightly against the floral wallpaper. Her breathing sounded erratic. The heavy gold necklace around her throat moved up and down rapidly as she gasped for air. The faint smell of stale wine and her heavy floral perfume created a suffocating cloud in the narrow space. The muffled sounds of the jazz band played softly behind us, filtering through the thick walls. "You are destroying your sister's marriage over a few drawings," Helen hissed. Her voice vibrated with a toxic mix of panic and authority. She pointed a trembling finger back toward the ballroom, where Bradley stood frozen in his own failure. "You humiliated him in front of a billionaire, Aaliyah. You made a public spectacle out of a simple misunderstanding. You could have walked away, but you chose to be cruel." I looked down at her hand, which had finally released my arm. I smoothed the wrinkled lace covering my skin. I focused on the intricate stitching for a single second, maintaining my absolute composure. "It was not a misunderstanding," I replied. "It was a calculated theft." Helen waved her hand, dismissing my statement entirely. For my entire life, she possessed an incredible ability to bend reality to suit her preferences. When my father left us when I was 12, she told the neighbors he took an extended business trip and decided to settle overseas. When Vanessa failed out of her first semester of college, Helen told everyone the curriculum lacked creative vision and stifled her genius. Now she attempted to rebrand a felony as a minor family squabble. "You do not even need those clients," Helen sneered. Her upper lip curled into a look of pure disdain. She leaned closer, invading my personal space. Her eyes looked wild and defensive. "You play in the dirt, Aaliyah. You are just a gardener. Bradley is building a legacy. He constructs real things that matter to the economy. He required a portfolio to show Richard Sterling, and you possess dozens of them, sitting uselessly on that computer. You hoard your success, while your sister struggles to maintain her position in society. I stood perfectly still. I let her speak. Toxic people always reveal their methods if you remain quiet long enough. They fill the silence with confessions wrapped in accusations. I gave Vanessa the passcode Helen admitted. She lifted her chin, acting as if she had performed a noble deed. She looked at me with defiant eyes, expecting me to shrink under her authority. I knew you still used your old childhood phone number for your emergencies. I unlocked your safe, and I let her take what she needed to help her husband. Family helps family, Aaliyah. We share our resources when someone is struggling. You should have offered those files to him willingly, instead of forcing me to intervene. I catalog the confession in my mind. The pieces of evidence locked into place. She admitted to unauthorized access. She admitted to bypassing a physical security lock. She admitted to transferring stolen digital data. She felt so justified in her actions that she essentially handed me a verbal signed confession. She believed her status as my mother granted her immunity from the law. I did not yell. I did not cry over the fact that my own mother viewed my decade of rigorous architectural study and late-night engineering reviews as a useless hobby. Her opinion held zero value in my corporate reality. She could not comprehend the scale of my business because acknowledging my success meant admitting Vanessa was falling behind. I looked her directly in the eyes. I kept my voice devoid of any warmth or familial affection. I spoke to her the same way I would speak to a hostile vendor violating a contract. Stealing proprietary architectural designs is corporate espionage, Mom, I stated. The words hung in the narrow hallway, heavy and sharp. It is a federal crime. It is not borrowing a sweater from my closet. You broke into a secure device and distributed confidential blueprints to a failing developer. You exposed my firm to massive liability just to prop up a man who cannot secure his own investments. Helen opened her mouth to argue, her face turned purple with rage. I raised my hand, stopping her instantly. I refuse to debate this with you, I continued. You chose to value Bradley's imaginary legacy over my actual livelihood. You chose to treat my business like a community donation bin. We are done talking. Do not contact me tonight. I turned my back on her before she could formulate another pathetic excuse. I walked out of the corridor and stepped back into the main event space. The reception remained completely quiet. The guests stood in small groups holding their drinks, waiting to see how the bride would handle the fallout. The tension in the room felt thick enough to cut. I did not offer them a dramatic meltdown. I did not run to the microphone and demand attention. I located my wedding coordinator standing near the main catering station. Her name was Jessica, and she handled high-stress events with military precision. She had orchestrated events for politicians and celebrities. She knew how to manage a crisis without making a sound. I caught Jessica's eye and offered a subtle tilt of my head toward the bar alcove and the corridor where Helen lingered. Jessica nodded. She understood the assignment immediately. She signaled 2 venue security guards dressed in dark, tailored suits. They moved smoothly across the room, forming a quiet but impenetrable wall around Bradley, Vanessa, and Helen. Jessica spoke to them in a hushed, professional tone. She did not create a scene. She simply informed them that their presence was no longer required and guided them firmly toward the side exit leading to the valet parking area. Vanessa looked back at me as the guards escorted them through the double doors. Her mascara ran down her cheeks, leaving dark streaks against her pale skin. The arrogant smirk she wore earlier had completely vanished. Bradley stared at the floor, entirely defeated. His shoulders slumped forward under the weight of his ruined reputation. Helen kept her head held high, pretending she was leaving by choice, but her hands shook visibly. The doors swung shut behind them, severing their connection to my life. The heavy tension in the ballroom evaporated almost instantly. A collective exhale moved through the crowd. The dark cloud over the room lifted. Mark walked across the polished wood floor and stopped in front of me. He did not ask if I felt okay. He did not ask if I needed to sit down and process the trauma. He understood my strength better than anyone in the room. He simply held out his hand. His eyes communicated absolute, unwavering support. The band leader took the cue. The musicians raised their brass instruments and began playing an upbeat, lively jazz standard. The melody filled the empty space, washing away the lingering toxicity. The vibrant notes signaled a return to the celebration. I placed my hand in Mark's. He pulled me close and guided me onto the center of the dance floor. We moved together under the crystal chandeliers. I rested my head against his shoulder, letting out a long, slow breath. The silk of my dress spun around my ankles as he spun me across the room. My colleagues and friends gradually joined us on the floor, clapping and laughing. The celebration resumed with a renewed, vibrant energy. I refused to let 3 bitter people destroy a night I had spent 12 months planning. They did not possess the power to ruin my joy. We danced for hours. The catering staff brought out late-night appetizers. We cut the 4-tier vanilla cake and drank expensive champagne. I laughed with my college friends and took hundreds of photographs in the photo booth. Every time someone tried to bring up the incident at the bar, I gracefully changed the subject. I protected the boundaries of my happiness. When the night finally ended, Mark and I climbed into the back of a vintage town car and drove toward our own hotel. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, casting long shadows across the leather seats. I leaned against the upholstery, feeling physically exhausted but completely clear-headed. The emotional confrontation was over, but the logistical reality of their betrayal was just beginning to unfold in my mind. People do not risk federal charges just to show off at a party. Bradley and Vanessa had acted with a level of recklessness that defied basic logic. They were drowning. The fake real estate empire was crumbling, and they had tried to use my company as a life raft to stay afloat. I rested my head on the window glass and watched the dark streets roll by. If they were desperate enough to steal encrypted blueprints on my wedding day, they were hiding something much worse in their financial ledgers. I needed to know exactly how deep their hole went. I needed to uncover the true extent of Bradley's failure so I could protect my firm from any collateral damage. Tomorrow morning, I would not be opening wedding gifts or packing for a honeymoon. I would be hiring a corporate attorney. The real war was about to begin. Monday morning arrived, with a cold rain hitting the glass of my home office window. The sky hung low and gray over the neighborhood. I did not wait for a text message or a phone call from my mother. Toxic people do not apologize when their schemes fall apart. They simply retreat into the shadows to fabricate a better lie. I refused to grant them the time to build a new narrative. Mark sat across from my mahogany desk, holding a ceramic mug of black coffee. The soft glow of his laptop screen reflected in his glasses. In his role as a wealth manager, he handled hostile corporate takeovers and dismantled fraudulent portfolios daily. Today, he was directing his analytical skills toward his own brother-in-law. I booted up my secure workstation and initiated a video conference call. Thomas Hughes appeared on my monitor. He served as the lead intellectual property litigator for a top-tier corporate firm in Atlanta. I paid his premium retainer because he did not care about delicate family dynamics. He only cared about securing airtight victories. "I secured the digital access logs from your server," Thomas said. His voice sounded crisp through the speakers. "We hold definitive proof of the unauthorized transfer. The timestamps and IP addresses lock your sister and mother directly to the data breach. But before we draft any response, I ran a comprehensive asset check on Bradley's development firm. We need to know if they possess the capital to pay civil damages." What did the background check reveal? I asked. Thomas adjusted his dark tie. You cannot squeeze water from a stone, Aaliyah. Bradley's company is a ghost ship. They are currently insolvent. Mark leaned forward, placing his coffee mug onto a coaster. Define insolvent, Thomas. Are we looking at a temporary cash flow dip or a total structural failure? Structural failure, Thomas replied. He clicked his mouse and shared his screen. Rows of highlighted financial data and court filings populated my monitor. I pulled the state business registry and the Uniform Commercial Code filings. Bradley defaulted on 3 separate commercial loans over the past 60 days. 2 local banks have already initiated foreclosure proceedings on his only active construction sites. I studied the red numbers filling the spreadsheet. The deficit was staggering. Bradley owed millions of dollars to institutional lenders. It gets much worse, Thomas continued. Last Thursday, a private equity group filed a formal complaint with the State Regulatory Commission. They supplied Bradley with $2 million in seed money for a retail space downtown last year. The retail space does not exist. Bradley never even poured a concrete foundation. Mark steepled his fingers. Where did the capital go? He commingled the funds, Thomas said. He used the new investor money to pay off outstanding personal debts. Luxury vehicle leases, high-end country club memberships, expensive boutique hotel reservations. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a sickening crunch. I remembered the $3,000 hotel bill Helen tried to force me to pay at the rehearsal dinner. I remembered the sheer terror hiding behind Vanessa's arrogant insults. Bradley's firm was not waiting on a confidential breakthrough. They were operating a shell game. He is running a Ponzi scheme, Mark stated. His voice carried a cold, clinical certainty. He takes new money to pay old debts to maintain the illusion of success. But the music stopped. The private equity group realized the retail space was a sham, and they are coming for their cash. The room felt incredibly quiet, except for the rain tapping against the glass. Bradley needs an immediate influx of cash to pay back the original equity group before the state regulatory board hands the case over to federal prosecutors, Thomas explained. If he fails to secure funding by the end of the month, he will face involuntary Chapter 11 bankruptcy. He will also likely face criminal wire fraud charges. I looked at the digital blueprint files sitting on my desktop screen. The eco-community designs I had spent hundreds of hours engineering and perfecting. That explains the pitch to Richard Sterling, I said. My voice sounded hollow as the truth settled into my bones. Bradley did not just want to impress a billionaire to boost his ego. He needed Richard's capital to cover his stolen funds and avoid a federal prison sentence. Exactly, Thomas confirmed. But Richard Sterling is a seasoned shark. He never writes a check without seeing tangible assets. Bradley possessed 0 assets. His portfolio was entirely empty. So he stole mine, I finished. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The betrayal extended far beyond sibling rivalry or petty jealousy. This was not about Vanessa wanting to look successful at a party to stroke her own vanity. This involved calculated, premeditated criminal survival. Vanessa and Helen knew Bradley stood on the edge of federal indictment. They knew his luxury lifestyle was funded by stolen investor capital. Instead of holding him accountable, they decided to use my company as a sacrificial shield. I thought about the logistical reality of their plan. If Richard Sterling had actually believed Bradley's pitch and signed a letter of intent based on my stolen designs, the legal fallout would have destroyed my life. Mark traced the edge of his keyboard. If Sterling wired funds to Bradley based on your proprietary blueprints, Aaliyah, your firm would be legally tethered to a federal fraud investigation. My stomach turned. Mark spoke the exact truth. When the regulatory board inevitably audited Bradley's failing company, they would discover my architectural files listed as corporate assets. The federal investigators would see my company logo on the documents. They would assume I participated in the scheme to defraud investors. They would subpoena my servers. They would freeze my business accounts pending a lengthy investigation. The high net worth clients who trusted me with their privacy would flee instantly. Federal judges and tech executives do not hire landscape architects tied to wire fraud cases. My reputation would shatter overnight. The business I spent a decade building from the ground up would evaporate into thin air. Helen and Vanessa were willing to let all of that happen. My own mother was willing to risk my freedom and my livelihood just to prevent Vanessa from having to downsize her leased mansion. Helen valued Bradley's fake legacy more than my actual survival. She handed my secure files to a desperate man, knowing the collateral damage could erase my entire existence. I took a slow, deep breath. The last remaining thread of familial obligation snapped. The invisible rope tying me to my mother's approval severed. I did not feel sadness. I felt a profound, liberating clarity. I turned my attention back to the video call. "Thomas," I said. My tone left zero room for negotiation. Bradley and Vanessa crossed the line from family members into hostile corporate entities. I want to treat them accordingly. Thomas picked up a silver pen. "Tell me how you want to proceed." "They possess stolen intellectual property on their personal devices," I stated. "They intend to use my files to defraud investors. I need to amputate my firm from their sinking ship immediately." "We can file a civil suit for theft of trade secrets," Thomas suggested. "We can drag them through a lengthy discovery process and drain their remaining resources." "No," I replied. "A lawsuit takes months to process through the courts. Bradley is desperate right now. Desperate men do stupid things when they are cornered. I will not give him time to shop my designs to another investor while we wait for a hearing. I want to cut off their air supply today." Mark looked at me with a proud, calculated smile. "Draft the strictest legal notice your firm can produce," I instructed Thomas. "I want a formal demand requiring the immediate destruction of all my copied files. I want them to sign a sworn affidavit admitting they bypassed my security and stole the data without my consent under penalty of perjury." "If they refuse to sign?" Thomas asked. "Then we take the access logs to the authorities and let the district attorney handle the felony charges," I said. "But I want the legal documents served directly to their hands. I want them to realize they can no longer hide behind my mother's excuses." Thomas nodded, taking rapid notes. "I will have the documents prepared and sent to a local process server within the hour. Where should we send them?" I thought about Vanessa's daily routine. I knew exactly where she spent her Monday mornings. She liked to sit in her luxury living room drinking imported tea, while Helen visited to discuss country club gossip. They liked to pretend their lives were pristine and untouchable. "Send the process server to Vanessa's home address," I said. "Make sure they arrive before lunch." The video call ended. I closed my laptop. My family believed they could manipulate me privately because I always avoided public conflict. They thought I would stay quiet to keep the peace. They were about to discover that when you force a professional into a corner, they stop playing by family rules. The era of silent endurance was over. The era of documented consequences had officially begun. Mark gathered his leather briefcase from the foyer chair and kissed my cheek. He departed for his downtown office, leaving me alone in the quiet house. The rain continued to wash down the glass panes of my study. I watched the water trace jagged lines across the window. I felt zero urge to reach out to my sister or my mother. Toxic people do not offer sincere apologies when their schemes fall apart. They simply retreat into the shadows to fabricate a better lie. I refused to grant them the time to build a new narrative. Thomas sent the final drafts of the legal demands via a secure encrypted link at 10:30 in the morning. I opened the attachments on my dual monitors. The language read cold, crisp, and surgical. The first document served as a formal cease and desist order. It outlined the exact timeline of the data breach, identifying the stolen property by its specific rendering titles and file sizes. It left zero room for interpretation. The second document carried heavier consequences. It was a spoliation of evidence notice. This specific legal tool functions as a trap for fraudsters. It informed Bradley that a pending civil suit required the preservation of his digital devices. If he attempted to delete, transfer, or hide the stolen files to cover his tracks, he would trigger immediate court sanctions for destroying legal evidence. He faced a brutal dilemma. If he kept the files, he possessed stolen goods. If he deleted the files, he committed a secondary offense. My attorney had effectively placed Bradley's hands in a digital vice. The final page required a notarized signature. It demanded Vanessa and Bradley admit to the unauthorized access and surrender their hardware for a supervised data wipe. If they failed to comply within 48 hours, Thomas would file the civil suit and forward the access logs to the district attorney. I tracked the process server through a live GPS link Thomas provided. The server drove a discreet gray sedan. He approached the gated entrance of Vanessa's suburban neighborhood just before noon. I knew the security gate code because I had paid the installation invoice for their homeowner association 2 years ago. Bradley claimed his accounts were frozen due to a banking error at the time. He never paid me back. I watched the digital tracker move up the winding street and stop at their concrete driveway. 10 minutes later, the delivery status on my screen updated to served. My cell phone vibrated across the mahogany desk less than 30 seconds after the confirmation appeared. The screen illuminated with Helen's face. It was a photograph taken during a family holiday where she forced everyone to wear matching colors to project an image of perfect harmony. I let the device vibrate 3 times. I regulated my breathing, ensuring my heart rate remained steady. I swiped the green icon and brought the speaker to my ear. Helen did not offer a greeting. A sharp, jagged sob transmitted through the receiver. "How could you send a stranger to this house?" Helen gasped. "A man just walked up to the front porch and shoved the stack of legal threats into Vanessa's hands. The neighbors were outside, Aaliyah. They watched the whole thing happen from their driveways." Helen weaponized her tears. During my childhood, she utilized this exact crying technique whenever my father tried to enforce a household budget. She would weep until the house felt too uncomfortable to endure, forcing everyone to surrender just to buy a moment of peace. I trained myself to ignore the sound of her crying, the year she convinced me to drain my early savings account to fund Vanessa's failed boutique clothing line. I worked 3 jobs during college to rebuild that account, while Vanessa abandoned the clothing line after 2 months. I learned then that my mother's tears were a currency designed to bankrupt my boundaries. I refuse to accept that currency today. The process server delivered required legal notices, I said. My tone matched the text of the documents. Vanessa transferred proprietary corporate assets without permission. The papers outline the steps required to resolve the theft. "They are just computer files," Helen pleaded. Her voice grew shrill, echoing through the phone. "You have backups on your computer. You did not lose anything. You are acting like a vicious tyrant over a few garden sketches. Vanessa is hyperventilating on the sofa right now. You are causing her physical distress." "She is hyperventilating because she got caught," I replied. "Those garden sketches represent months of contracted engineering work. The affidavit is non-negotiable. They must sign it and submit their devices for a clean wipe by Wednesday afternoon." The sound of shattering glass echoed through the phone. Someone had thrown a hard object against a wall in the background. Helen lowered her voice into a frantic, strained whisper. She tried to pivot her strategy from guilt to negotiation. "Listen to me," Helen urged. "I can make Vanessa apologize to you. I will bring her to your house, and she will say she is sorry. Just call your lawyer and withdraw the papers. We can handle this internally like a real family." "An apology does not secure my client data," I said. An apology does not protect my firm from liability when Bradley tries to pass my work off to another investor. Helen dropped the negotiation tactic. The familiar venom seeped back into her words. You always wanted to see her fail. You hated that she married a man with grand ambitions while you dug in the dirt. You are using this minor mistake to punish her for being happy. Her accusations slid off me. I felt no need to defend my happiness or my career. You cannot do this, Alia, Helen begged, her voice cracking again. Bradley meets with his primary investors tomorrow morning. If you force him to sign a confession, he loses his development license. He loses everything. You will ruin Bradley. You will put your own sister out on the street over a seating chart and a tablet? I leaned back in my leather chair. I looked at the rain falling outside, washing the dirt from the driveway. Bradley ruined Bradley, I said. I am protecting my company. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I ended the call mid-sentence. I tapped the contact settings menu and pressed block. I navigated to Vanessa's contact profile and applied the same restriction. I repeated the process for Bradley. I severed their direct access to my life with 3 simple taps on a glass screen. The silence in my office felt heavy but clean. I set the phone face down on the desk. I turned my attention back to my workstation, intending to review a new vendor contract. I assumed shutting the door on their access would end the immediate conflict. I expected them to hunker down and contact a defense attorney, but toxic individuals rarely accept a closed door. When they lose control over your actions, they try to seize control over your reputation. They look for a public window to break. My desktop monitor chimed. A social media monitoring application I use for my brand management flagged a sudden spike in traffic related to my name. I clicked the notification banner. A new video had just been posted to Vanessa's public feed. The thumbnail showed her sitting on her couch with red, puffy eyes staring directly into the camera. The caption below the video read, "How my toxic sister is trying to destroy my family." I moved my cursor over the thumbnail and clicked play. The video buffered for a fraction of a second before Vanessa's face filled the center of my monitor. She had staged the recording meticulously. She sat on her expensive living room sofa, wrapped in an oversized gray sweater. She looked uncharacteristically unkempt. Her hair hung in loose, messy strands, and her makeup appeared strategically smudged to mimic a recent breakdown. She stared directly into the camera lens and took a long, trembling breath. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Vanessa whispered. Her voice shook with rehearsed vulnerability. "But sometimes, the people you love the most are the ones who want to see you fail." I turned the volume up. The sound of rain lashing against my office window mixed with the sound of my sister lying to the internet. Vanessa launched into a 7-minute monologue. She never mentioned the stolen blueprints. She never mentioned the boutique hotel or the fake real estate pitch involving Richard Sterling. Instead, she threw out therapy buzzwords like cheap confetti. She called me a classic narcissist who could not handle sharing the spotlight on my wedding day. She claimed I harbored deep-seated jealousy toward her marriage and used my reception as a trap to humiliate her husband. She accused me of sabotaging Bradley's career out of pure spite because I lacked basic human empathy. During her freshman year of college, Vanessa took one single semester of introductory psychology before dropping out to focus on becoming a lifestyle influencer. She retained just enough vocabulary to weaponize clinical terms against anyone who told her no. Watching her cry on camera felt like watching a poorly directed high school play. She paused in all the right places. She wiped away invisible tears. She begged her followers to send positive energy to her family during this difficult season of toxic abuse. My phone illuminated on the corner of my desk before the video even finished playing. The notifications started flooding the lock screen. The alerts chimed in rapid succession. The messages originated from extended relatives living a few hours away in Georgia and Florida. These were aunts and cousins who only called during the holidays or when they needed free landscaping advice for their backyards. Aunt Diane texted first. Her message popped up in a gray bubble. Aaliyah, I just saw Vanessa post. What is wrong with you? You need to apologize and fix this right now. We keep family business private. You do not treat your sister this way. Uncle Gary followed less than a minute later. I expected better from you. Your sister is falling apart. Stop being so bitter and help her. The messages kept rolling in like a coordinated strike. Cousin Rachel sent a long paragraph accusing me of ruining the family name and acting like a spoiled child. They consumed the victim narrative without asking a single question. They saw tears on a screen and instantly assigned blame to me. For decades, they had watched Helen coddle Vanessa, and they adopted the same protective stance. My chest tightened. The urge to type back burned in my fingertips. I wanted to send them the digital access logs. I wanted to tell Aunt Diane that her precious niece had committed a felony. I wanted to expose the entire fraud right there in the group chat. I pulled my hands away from the phone. I took a slow breath, inhaling the scent of the damp earth coming through the window draft. Engaging fuels the victim complex. Defending myself on a text thread would only feed the drama machine Vanessa had built. If I responded with anger, she would take screenshots of my texts and post them as further proof of my alleged instability. She wanted a mudslinging contest because mud obscures the truth. I ignored the bait. I silenced the notifications and placed the mobile device inside my desk drawer. I hovered my mouse over the video player and utilized a browser extension to download the file directly to my hard drive. I secured the footage before she could alter or delete it. I opened my email client and created a new message to Thomas Hughes. I dragged the downloaded video file into the attachment bar. Thomas, I typed. Vanessa took her grievances to the internet. She published a defamatory video targeting my professional reputation. Please issue a formal response. Do not hold back. Thomas replied in under 12 minutes. His email contained a single line. I am drafting the warning now. He did not waste time playing defense. 4 hours later, Thomas forwarded me the final draft of the defamation notice. It read like a surgical strike. The letter informed Vanessa that her public statements constituted per se defamation intended to harm my business standing. But Thomas did not stop at standard legal threats. He weaponized the cold, hard facts. He attached the digital forensics report directly to the warning letter. The appendix included the exact IP address used to breach my server. It included the hotel keycard log placing Helen in my suite at the exact time of the theft. It included the precise timestamp of the file transfer to Vanessa's personal phone. He documented every footprint they left behind. The final paragraph delivered the killing blow. The words jumped off the screen with absolute authority. If you desire to litigate this matter in the court of public opinion, we are fully prepared to release these forensic documents to the public and the appropriate regulatory authorities. Remove the video immediately or face severe civil and criminal exposure. Thomas sent the notice via certified electronic mail, ensuring we held a read receipt the moment Vanessa opened the file. I leaned back in my leather chair and watched the clock on my wall tick forward. I imagined Vanessa sitting on her couch refreshing her social media feed, soaking up the sympathy comments from gullible strangers. I imagined the exact moment the email notification from a top-tier corporate law firm flashed across her screen. I pictured her opening the attachments and seeing the undeniable proof of her crime laid out in black and white. She thought she could win by playing the victim. She forgot that playing the victim requires the other person to remain quiet and absorb the blow. I refreshed her social media page every hour. The video continued to gather views throughout the late afternoon. Aunt Diane left another comment underneath it, praising Vanessa for her bravery in speaking out against toxic siblings. The digital echo chamber hummed with manufactured outrage. Then, evening arrived. The street lights outside my window flickered on, casting long shadows across my driveway. I clicked the refresh button on my browser one more time. The page reloaded. A gray error box appeared in the center of the screen. The text read, "The content you are looking for is no longer available." Vanessa had quietly deleted the video. The smear campaign crumbled in less than 24 hours. She retreated into silence, realizing her fake tears held zero power against verified digital evidence. She knew she could not sustain the lie once the truth entered the arena. My phone stopped buzzing. The aunts and cousins who had demanded my apology suddenly had nothing to say. The rapid deletion of the video told them everything they needed to know about who was telling the truth. The public attack had failed. I had protected my firm from the online slander. But the damage Vanessa and Bradley caused at the wedding had already set off a chain reaction in the corporate world. While Vanessa worried about her social media followers, Richard Sterling had been making phone calls to his network. He did not take kindly to men who pitched stolen blueprints. The real consequences were about to hit Bradley's bank accounts, and the financial fallout would pull their entire facade down to the ground. The following morning brought a quiet shift in the atmosphere. The heavy rain clouds cleared, leaving behind a bright, sharp sunlight that illuminated the dust particles floating in my office. The digital silence felt profound. The barrage of text messages from angry relatives had ceased entirely. The social media notifications remained dark, but the real world operated on a different frequency than internet gossip. The corporate machinery had already started grinding forward, and it did not require a public relations campaign to destroy a fraud. It only required a few choice words from the right person. My office phone rang just before noon. The caller identification displayed my husband's direct line at his downtown financial firm. I picked up the receiver and tucked it against my shoulder while reviewing a soil analysis report. "Have you checked the state business registry today?" Mark asked. His voice carried a low, steady hum of professional satisfaction. I set my pen down on the desk. "I have been analyzing pH levels for a new botanical garden project all morning," I replied. "What did I miss?" "Richard Sterling plays golf at the Oak Mountain Country Club every Tuesday morning," Mark said. "My managing director played in the foursome right behind him today. Apparently, Richard spent the entire breakfast service discussing a certain local developer who tried to pitch stolen schematics at a wedding reception." I leaned back in my leather chair. The image formed in my mind with crystal clarity. Richard did not need to file a formal complaint with the authorities to ruin a dishonest man. In the high-tier commercial real estate sector of the South, reputation dictates survival. Trust serves as the primary currency. A warning spoken by a billionaire over a plate of eggs and a cup of black coffee carries more weight than a stack of legal injunctions. Richard did not shout. He did not post an angry video. He simply stated the facts to a room full of men who controlled the regional capital flow. "How fast did the news travel?" I asked. "Faster than a wildfire," Mark replied. "The financial sector operates like a small town when a bad investment is exposed. By 10 o'clock this morning, the remaining private equity partners keeping your brother-in-law's firm afloat started making panicked phone calls. I ran a terminal check on his corporate entity 10 minutes ago. The structure is collapsing as we speak." Mark detailed the cascade of financial ruin. The few local dentists and retired surgeons who had provided Bradley with operating cash heard the rumors. They called their own attorneys. Those attorneys ran emergency audits and discovered the empty bank accounts. The illusion of the visionary entrepreneur shattered the moment the investors demanded to see the physical assets. Bradley possessed nothing to show them. He held 0 permits. He owned 0 viable land tracts. He controlled 0 proprietary designs. When a house of cards catches a gust of wind, it does not fall slowly. It flattens in an instant. By Thursday afternoon, the fallout reached the public record. Mark sent me a secure link to the state court docket. I clicked the URL and watched the page load. Bradley's real estate development firm had officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. I scrolled through the initial schedule of liabilities attached to the filing. The numbers painted a portrait of devastating greed and catastrophic mismanagement. The document listed millions of dollars in unsecured debt. It revealed unpaid invoices from local contractors who had poured concrete for projects that were abandoned months ago. It exposed six figures in overdue lease payments for the luxury vehicles Bradley drove to project an aura of wealth. The most revealing section detailed their personal liabilities. The sprawling mansion Vanessa loved to showcase on her social media feeds was not owned outright. It carried a massive adjustable-rate mortgage that had fallen into default 3 months prior. The bank had already initiated foreclosure proceedings. The country club dues remained unpaid. The credit cards were maxed out to their absolute limits. They had constructed their entire existence on a foundation of lies. They spent money they did not earn to impress people they did not know. When the cash stopped flowing, they tried to steal my life work to plug the holes in their sinking ship. I closed the browser tab. I did not feel the urge to celebrate. Watching a toxic family member face the consequences of their own actions brings a cold, sterile kind of closure. The universe was simply balancing a ledger that had remained in the red for far too long. I spent the weekend focusing on my own business. I finalized the planting schedules for a sprawling estate in the next county. I reviewed structural retaining wall proposals. I operated in a reality built on tangible results and hard labor. My firm stood on solid ground because I never took shortcuts. Monday evening arrived quietly. I sat at my drafting table, sketching a preliminary layout for a new client. The house felt peaceful. My personal cell phone buzzed against the wooden drafting board. The screen lit up, displaying the word "restricted" in plain gray text. I usually ignore block numbers, assuming they belong to telemarketers or automated political surveys. But a strange instinct compelled me to reach out and swipe the answer icon. I lifted the device to my ear and remained silent, waiting for the caller to speak first. A ragged, sharp intake of breath echoed through the speaker. It sounded like an animal caught in a trap. "You ruined my life." The voice was unrecognizable at first. It lacked the polished, arrogant tone Vanessa usually projected. It sounded raw and hollow, stripped of all pretense and artificial confidence. I kept my breathing steady. I did not hang up immediately. I waited for her to run out of breath. "The bank sent the final notice today," Vanessa screamed, the audio clipped and distorted as her volume peaked. "The moving trucks are coming by the end of the month. They are taking the house, Alaya. They are taking the cars." Bradley sits in the dark and refuses to speak to me. His investors are threatening to press federal wire fraud charges. We have nothing left. You did this to us. You planned this just to watch me fail. The sheer scale of her delusion hung in the air. Even now, standing in the wreckage of her own poor choices, she refused to look in the mirror. She needed a villain to blame for the fire she started herself. For her entire life, Helen had taught her that every failure belonged to someone else. If she failed a test, the teacher was unfair. If she crashed a car, the road was too slick. If her husband ran a fraudulent company and lost their home, the sister who refused to be robbed was the enemy. I let her scream for another 20 seconds. I listened to the sound of her frantic breathing. I felt my own pulse. It remained calm and even. I did not feel a shred of guilt. "Vanessa," I said. My voice cut through her hysterics like a scalpel. She stopped shouting. She waited, expecting me to offer sympathy or a financial lifeline. She expected the old family dynamic to kick in, where I rushed forward to clean up the mess she created. "You lost your house because your husband ran a fraudulent business, and you tried to steal my property to save it," I stated. I delivered the words with cold, factual precision. "My name is not on your mortgage. I did not wait for her response. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button disconnecting the call. I placed the phone back onto the drafting table. The silence in the room returned, deeper and more satisfying than before. A profound sense of liberation washed over my shoulders. Setting a boundary requires holding the line when the other person thrashes against it. The strict adherence to the truth infuriated Vanessa more than any screaming match ever could. She was finally trapped in a reality she could not manipulate. I picked up my drafting pencil and returned to my sketch. The graphite scratched softly against the textured paper. I drew a line indicating a new stone pathway. I focused entirely on building something real. The phone did not ring again. Vanessa understood the door was permanently locked, but a toxic family ecosystem operates like a hydra. When you sever the head of the golden child, the enabler emerges to protect the stump. Helen had spent her entire adulthood ensuring Vanessa never faced a single consequence. Now, her favorite daughter was losing her mansion and her status in the country club circles. Helen would not accept that outcome quietly. I finished my sketch and turned off the desk lamp. I stood up to walk toward the kitchen for a glass of water. As I crossed the living room, the motion sensor lights on my front porch suddenly clicked on, illuminating the dark lawn. I paused by the front window and pulled the edge of the curtain back just an inch. A silver luxury sedan pulled into my driveway, breaking the quiet night. The tires crunched over the gravel, the engine shut off, but the headlights remained glaring through the glass panes of my front door. I recognized the vehicle immediately. My mother had arrived. She had exhausted all her emotional manipulation tactics. She had failed to guilt me over the phone. She had failed to use the court of public opinion. Now she was bringing the final weapon she possessed directly to my doorstep. The ultimate tool of control wielded by every desperate parent who realizes they have lost their grip on an independent child. She was coming to threaten my inheritance. The heavy tires of the silver sedan crunched over the wet gravel. The headlights cut a harsh white path across my manicured lawn. I remained perfectly still behind the living room curtain. My pulse maintained a steady rhythm. The car doors swung open. Helen stepped into the humid Alabama night. She did not bother to grab an umbrella. She marched straight up my brick walkway wearing a trench coat layered over her silk pajamas. Her posture radiated fierce desperation. She looked like a woman who had run out of chess pieces and decided to flip the board. She reached the front porch. She did not ring the doorbell. She lifted her fist and pounded on the solid mahogany wood. The thudding echoed through the quiet foyer. "Open this door, Alia!" she shouted. Her voice filtered through the thick wood, carrying a sharp, commanding edge. "I know you are awake. I see your interior lights shining on the grass." I stepped away from the window. I walked slowly into the foyer and stood 2 feet away from the entrance. I did not reach for the deadbolt. I crossed my arms and watched the heavy brass doorknob rattle. "You are going to listen to me," Helen demanded. "You are pushing your sister into a life of poverty. You hold the power to fix this right now." I kept my mouth shut. Responding to an escalation only feeds the fire. A sharp, metallic scrape broke the rhythm of her pounding. The brass mail slot positioned at the bottom of the door lifted open. A thick manila envelope shoved its way through the narrow opening. The packet hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. The brass flap snapped shut. I looked down at the envelope. I did not bend down to retrieve it right away. "Pick it up!" Helen yelled through the door. "Read the first page!" I lowered myself and grasped the thick paper. I pulled the tab and slid the contents out. The documents featured blue legal backing, indicating a formal, notarized filing. The bold black text across the header read, "Last Will and Testament of Helen Wilson." I flipped to the second page. A red sticky note pointed to a specific paragraph. The section detailed the transfer of the Lake Martin property. That specific estate had remained in our family for 3 generations. It featured 50 acres of prime waterfront real estate. For my entire childhood, Helen used that property as a behavioral leash. When I chose to study landscape architecture instead of corporate law, she threatened to remove my access to the lake house. I called her bluff and paid for my own tuition using scholarships. The estate served as her ultimate tool for compliance. I read the revised legal text. My name had been struck through with a thick black pen. A fresh notary stamp sat at the bottom of the page, dated just hours ago. "Are you reading it?" Helen asked. Her voice dropped the aggressive tone and adopted a low, manipulative cadence. "I spent the evening with my estate planner. I restructured the entire trust." I flipped to the third page. She had reallocated every liquid asset, every investment account, and the entire Lake Martin property exclusively to Vanessa. "You leave me zero choices, Aaliyah," she continued through the solid wood. "You are attempting to bankrupt your own family. I will not allow you to destroy Bradley's future over a petty grudge. If you want to remain in this family, you must drop the intellectual property theft affidavit tomorrow morning." I traced the fresh ink on the notary stamp. She was holding my inheritance hostage. But she did not stop there. The demands escalated. "Bradley needs seed money to restructure his firm," Helen said. "The private equity investors pulled their funding because you caused a scene at your wedding. You owe him a fresh start. You will wire $100,000 into a new limited liability company under his name by Friday. If you refuse, I will file this revised will with the probate court. You will receive nothing when I am gone. You will be entirely cut out of this family." I stood up holding the legal packet in my right hand. The sheer audacity of her ultimatum hung in the dim foyer. She expected me to break down. She anticipated the sound of the deadbolt unlocking, followed by a tearful apology. She thought the threat of losing a waterfront estate would force me to surrender my business integrity and hand over $100,000 in extortion money. She severely miscalculated her target. Money only functions as leverage if the victim actually desires it. I built my firm from dirt and sweat. I funded my own startup. I secured my own high-net-worth clients. My bank accounts reflected a decade of relentless, focused labor. I did not need her trust fund. I did not need her lake house. I certainly did not need her conditional affection. I reached out and turned the deadbolt lock. The mechanism clicked loudly. I pulled the heavy mahogany door open. Helen stood on the welcome mat. The humid night air rushed into the foyer. Her hair looked frizzy from the damp weather. She wore a smug, triumphant expression, believing the sound of the unlocking door signaled my total surrender. She straightened her posture, preparing to dictate the terms of my capitulation. I did not invite her inside. I stepped directly into the center of the doorway, blocking her path. I held the revised will out toward her. "Keep it," I said. My voice held no anger. It carried no sorrow. It delivered a flat, factual truth. Helen blinked. Her smug expression faltered. She looked at the documents in my extended hand and then looked up at my face. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her tone wavered. "I am rejecting your terms," I replied. "I do not want your money. I do not want the Lake Martin property. I do not negotiate with extortion." I pressed the legal packet directly against her chest, forcing her to grab it to prevent the papers from falling onto the wet porch. She clutched the blue folder like a shield. "You are making a terrible mistake," Helen stammered. "You are throwing away millions of dollars in generational wealth. You will regret this when Vanessa inherits everything. Vanessa will need every penny to pay off Bradley's fraud settlements," I stated. "I suggest you file that document quickly because the federal regulators will likely try to attach liens to her future assets." Helen's face drained of all color. The realization struck her with physical force. Her ultimate weapon had failed. The invisible leash she had used to control her daughters for 3 decades snapped into pieces. She stared at me, recognizing that she possessed zero leverage over a grounded, successful woman who funded her own existence. "You are a cold, heartless daughter," Helen whispered. The venom returned, but it lacked any real power. "I am a business owner protecting her firm," I corrected her. "Now you need to turn around and walk back to your car. If you do not step off my porch in the next 10 seconds, I will call the local dispatch and have you removed for trespassing." I did not raise my voice. I simply outlined the consequence. Helen searched my eyes for any sign of hesitation or bluffing. She found nothing but cold resolve. The psychological break of a manipulative parent losing total control manifested in her posture. Her shoulders slumped. The fierce, commanding aura she projected her entire life evaporated into the humid night air. She looked tired, old, and entirely defeated. She took a step backward off the welcome mat. She did not say another word. She turned around and walked down the brick path toward her idling vehicle. Her steps looked slow and unsteady. She pulled the car door open and slid into the driver's seat. I watched her reverse out of my driveway. The red taillights faded down the dark suburban street until they disappeared around the corner. I stepped back inside and closed the heavy mahogany door. I locked the deadbolt. I felt a profound lightness settle into my bones. The toxic tumor that had infected my life for 33 years had finally been excised. I severed the connection on my own terms. I secured my boundaries and rejected their extortion. The family war was officially over. I had won by simply refusing to participate in their destruction. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. I drank it slowly, enjoying the deep silence of my home. The personal drama had reached its conclusion, but the professional ripples of the wedding incident were just beginning to expand outward. Handling Richard Sterling with absolute integrity and strict legal boundaries had set a chain of events into motion within the high-tier commercial real estate sector. A major shift in my career trajectory was approaching, and it would prove that standing firm in the truth always yields a higher return than surrendering to a lie. Tuesday morning sunlight flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my commercial design studio. I walked past the reception desk and greeted my team of junior architects. The drafting tables hummed with quiet productivity. Printers pushed out wide-format topographic maps. The scent of fresh coffee and plotting paper filled the air. I set my briefcase down in my corner office and powered on my workstation. I felt a distinct absence of anxiety. For decades, a low-level frequency of dread had hummed in the back of my mind, always anticipating the next family crisis or financial demand. That frequency had flatlined. Rejecting my mother's extortion attempt the previous night severed the final psychological chain. I sat in my ergonomic chair and reviewed a soil density report, feeling lighter than I had in 33 years. My desk phone buzzed. My office manager spoke through the intercom. "Richard Sterling is on line 1, she said. He bypassed the standard client intake form and requested to speak with you directly." I picked up the receiver. "Good morning, Richard," I said. "Aliyah," he replied. His voice carried the same booming resonance that had shattered Bradley's fake pitch at my wedding reception. "I am standing in my boardroom looking at the original renderings you sent me last year for the eco community. The project stalled because I lacked a competent developer to execute the grading. I just fired the firm I hired last month." I pulled a fresh legal pad from my drawer and grabbed a pen. "I am sorry to hear that," I said. "Do not be sorry," Richard continued. "I want you to take over the entire master plan. I am bringing in a trusted commercial builder from Texas to handle the concrete and framing, but I want your firm acting as the lead visionary for the environmental integration. I want you controlling the landscape architecture, the retaining structures, and the subterranean water systems. I wrote the project parameters down on the legal pad. That expands the scope of our original agreement significantly, Richard. I am aware, he said. I am wiring a $300,000 retainer to your corporate account by noon today to secure your immediate availability. I stopped writing. That figure represented a staggering increase from my standard retainer fee. Richard did not wait for my response. I do not just hire talent, Aaliyah. I hire character. When I watched you dismantle that fraud at your wedding, I saw a woman who protects her assets with ruthless efficiency. You did not scream or throw a tantrum. You locked down your intellectual property and presented the digital evidence. Men in my tax bracket value discretion and ironclad boundaries above all else. I trust you to protect my investments the same way you protected your own firm. Thank you, Richard, I replied, keeping my tone professional and even. I will draft the new contract and have it sent over to your legal team by the end of the day. We are not finished, he said. I sit on the board of a private equity group. I have 3 colleagues who desperately need your services. One owns a private island off the coast of Florida that requires total ecological redesign. Another is building a mountain retreat in Aspen. The third just purchased a 5,000-acre ranch in Montana. I gave them your direct office line. I told them you are the only landscape architect they should trust with their privacy. Expect their calls this afternoon. He disconnected the line. I placed the receiver back onto the cradle. I looked out the window at the bustling city streets below. My commitment to building a legitimate business through hard work and strict protocols had just paid off in a way I could never have engineered. While Vanessa and Bradley tried to cheat their way into elite circles, I earned my place at the table by demonstrating competence under fire. The calls Richard promised arrived exactly as predicted. By the end of the week, my firm secured 3 new 8-figure contracts. The sudden influx of capital required immediate expansion. I contacted my commercial landlord and leased the entire top floor of our office building. I hired 2 new structural engineers, a dedicated botanist, and a full-time project manager. My business revenue doubled in the span of 14 days. I spent my hours reviewing blueprints, interviewing candidates, and building a sustainable empire. While my career skyrocketed into the upper echelon of the design industry, the consequences of Bradley's fraud reached their inevitable conclusion. Thomas Hughes called me on a Friday afternoon to finalize the intellectual property theft paperwork. We successfully forced Bradley to sign the surrender affidavit and wiped his devices clean. But Thomas possessed a habit of tracking his defeated opponents just to ensure the threat remained neutralized. I thought you might want a final update on the development firm, Thomas said over the phone. The federal bankruptcy court moved swiftly. The judge appointed an independent trustee to liquidate every asset tied to his name. I leaned back in my chair. What is the current status? I asked. Total structural collapse, Thomas reported. The local news stations picked up the story regarding the defrauded private equity group. A camera crew parked outside their gated neighborhood yesterday morning. The federal marshals arrived with moving trucks and padlocks. They evicted your sister and brother-in-law from the premises. The bank seized the house. The dealership sent repossession agents to tow away the luxury leased vehicles. They walked out the front door, carrying cardboard boxes on live television. I processed the information without a single trace of pity. I did not feel the urge to call them or offer a spare bedroom. They engineered their own destruction. They chose to build a life on shortcuts and entitlement. They gambled with stolen funds and tried to use my livelihood as a poker chip to stay in the game. The universe simply called their bluff and swept the table clean. They are facing pending federal indictments, Thomas added. The district attorney is convening a grand jury next month to review the wire fraud charges. I suspect Bradley will accept a plea deal involving prison time to avoid a public trial. Keep me updated if my firm is mentioned in any subpoenas, I said. Otherwise, close the file, Thomas. We are done with them. I hung up the phone and walked out of my office. I locked the glass doors of my newly expanded studio and took the elevator down to the parking garage. I felt nothing but forward momentum. Mark arranged a celebration for us that evening. He booked a private booth at the most exclusive steakhouse in the city center. We bypassed the crowded main dining room and settled into a quiet alcove overlooking the skyline. Soft jazz played through the hidden ceiling speakers. The waiter poured glasses of vintage red wine and left us alone in the dim lighting. Mark raised his glass. The crystal caught the flicker of the table candle. "To the woman who builds foundations that do not crumble," he said. I clinked my glass against his. We drank the wine and enjoyed a flawless dinner. We discussed his recent portfolio acquisitions and my upcoming trip to survey the private island in Florida. We talked about booking a vacation to Europe in the spring. We did not spend a single second discussing Vanessa Helen or Bradley. For my entire life, family dinners involved navigating emotional minefields. Every holiday meal featured Helen criticizing my career choices or Vanessa boasting about imaginary success. The constant underlying tension ruined every celebration. Sitting across from Mark, cutting into a dry-aged steak, I realized what peace actually tasted like. It tasted like reality. It tasted like a life built on truth instead of a fragile facade. The payoff felt incredibly satisfying precisely because I never had to plot revenge. I did not have to sabotage their lives. I did not have to plant false evidence or spread rumors at the country club. I simply stood my ground, documented the reality of their actions, and allowed the truth to act as a wrecking ball. The truth requires zero maintenance. Lies require constant, exhausting labor. They ran out of energy, and the truth crushed them. We finished our dinner, tipped the waiter generously, and walked out into the cool evening air. We held hands as we strolled down the city sidewalk. The chaos consuming the rest of my former family felt like a distant television show I had permanently turned off. I lived in the real world now. 6 months passed in complete tranquility. The seasons changed, bringing crisp autumn winds to the city. My firm finished the preliminary grading on Richard Sterling's eco-community. The project broke ground ahead of schedule, drawing praise from architectural magazines across the country. My team thrived in the expanded office space. I spent my days traveling between luxury job sites and returning home to a quiet, peaceful house. I believed the past was permanently sealed. I believed the block features on my phone and email servers provided an impenetrable shield against any lingering toxicity. I sat at my desk on a Tuesday morning, reviewing a vendor contract for imported stone. My email client chimed, signaling a new message in my primary inbox. I glanced at the notification banner sliding across the top right corner of my monitor. The sender address consisted of a random string of numbers and letters, indicating a newly created burner account. The spam filter failed to catch it because the sender utilized a clean server. I moved my mouse to delete the message without opening it. But my eyes caught the subject line before I could click the trash icon. The bold text read, "Sisterly Healing." I stopped moving my hand. The quiet peace of my morning fractured for a split second. A ghost had figured out a way to reach through the digital wall. Vanessa was trying to force a door open. I rested my index finger against the smooth surface of my computer mouse. The cursor hovered over the bold text in my inbox. The subject line, "Sisterly Healing," felt like a rusted hook covered in cheap bait. I did not feel a sudden spike in my heart rate. I did not feel the old familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The boundary I established 6 months ago had calcified into solid stone. I clicked the message out of sheer clinical curiosity to see what kind of fiction she had constructed today. The email loaded instantly across my wide monitor. The greeting lacked any formal apology. It began with a casual hello, as if we had simply lost touch over a busy summer schedule. Vanessa did not start by acknowledging the pain she caused or the laws she broke. She started by detailing her current, pathetic living arrangement. Bradley abandoned the marriage the moment the federal investigators froze their remaining assets. He signed a plea agreement to avoid a lengthy public trial and relocated to a different state to live in his brother's unfinished basement. The bankruptcy court liquidated their foreclosed mansion. The auction house claimed her designer furniture. Vanessa currently occupied the small guest bedroom inside Helen's suburban home. She slept on a twin mattress, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with unsold clothes from her failed boutique ventures. She painted a portrait of utter desolation. She described losing her social circle and her country club status as if she were a victim of a natural disaster rather than the architect of her own ruin. Then the tone of the message pivoted. Instead of taking ownership, she initiated a calculated shift in accountability. She typed that the past year was chaotic and painful for everyone involved. She actually wrote the words, "We both made choices that hurt each other during a difficult season." I leaned closer to the screen and studied that specific sentence. It represented a masterclass in psychological manipulation. I did not steal anything. I did not lie to commercial investors. I did not attempt to use my own family member as a sacrificial lamb to avoid prison time. I merely refused to let her destroy my livelihood. Yet she attempted to place my self-defense on the exact same moral plane as her felony theft. She wanted to distribute the blame evenly so she would not have to carry the full weight of her failures. The email shifted again, moving from a fake apology directly into a business proposal. Vanessa noted that my design firm was expanding rapidly across the region. She claimed she possessed extensive experience in high-end lifestyle marketing and public relations. She formally requested a position as my newly appointed brand executive. She outlined her demands with staggering audacity. She requested a starting salary, a corporate vehicle, and an entertainment budget to help secure new elite clients for my portfolio. She framed this employment demand as a noble path toward reconciliation. Working together, she wrote, would allow us to rebuild our familial bond while elevating my brand to the next social tier. She presented her presence in my company as a gift I should feel grateful to receive. I recognized the linguistic architecture of the message immediately. Helen had definitely dictated the paragraphs. For decades, my mother employed this exact strategy whenever her favorite daughter stumbled. The underlying philosophy remained constant throughout our entire lives. My stability existed solely to cushion Vanessa's falls. When Vanessa wrecked her car in high school, Helen demanded I drive her to every social event so she would not feel left out. When Vanessa quit her retail jobs because she disliked the management, Helen pressured me to hire her as a personal assistant. Helen trained Vanessa to believe that consequences were temporary inconveniences that someone else would eventually pay to remove. They thought the old rules still applied. They thought enough time had passed for my anger to fade. They assumed my financial success made me soft and generous. They wanted me to hand a salaried position with a corner office to the exact same woman who actively tried to burn my empire down to the ground. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. The keys felt cool beneath my fingertips. A younger version of myself might have typed a blistering response. I might have drafted a multi-paragraph essay listing every legal boundary she crossed. I might have pointed out her complete lack of qualifications for a commercial landscaping firm. I might have demanded a real apology for the wedding incident before even considering a conversation. But explaining reality to someone committed to a delusion is a profound waste of caloric energy. Replying would confirm she still held a direct line to my emotional state. It would prove her burner email strategy worked. It would give her a fresh piece of correspondence to twist and complain about to Helen. Silence acts as the ultimate weapon against a narcissist. It deprives them of the oxygen they need to survive. I dragged my mouse away from the reply button. I navigated to the top menu bar of my email client. I selected the icon labeled Mark as Spam. The system generated a prompt asking if I wanted to block all future correspondence from this specific server domain. I clicked Confirm. The message vanished from my inbox. It disappeared into the digital void, never to be seen or read again. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and let out a long, even breath. I looked around my sprawling executive office. The drafting tables outside my glass walls hummed with activity. My team of engineers and botanists collaborated on projects that spanned the entire East Coast. I built this reality through late nights, rigorous study, and unwavering integrity. True ownership of an empire does not just mean controlling the financial ledgers or the hiring process. True ownership means wielding absolute authority over who gains access to your time and your peace. I was the gatekeeper of my own reality, and I had just welded the gates shut. Vanessa would sit in her tiny suburban guest room, waiting for a reply that would never arrive. She would check her phone every hour. She would slowly realize that the bridge she burned could not be rebuilt with cheap, manipulative words. She would have to sit in the ashes of her own choices for the rest of her life. The digital calendar on my secondary monitor chimed, breaking my train of thought. A green notification banner popped up on the screen. The alert signaled my final site walkthrough at the Sterling estate. The project that started this entire chain of events was officially completed. Richard Sterling had scheduled a private tour of the grounds this afternoon to review the finished landscape before hosting his inaugural charity gala on the premises. I stood up from my desk and smoothed the fabric of my tailored trousers. I gathered my leather folio and my site inspection tools. I did not feel anger toward my past anymore. I only felt a deep, driving momentum pushing me toward the future. It was time to leave the digital ghost behind and walk through the physical paradise I had built with my own two hands. The tires of my SUV crunched over the crushed white gravel leading up to the Sterling estate. The heavy wrought iron security gates parted silently as my vehicle approached. I drove up the winding access road I had mapped out on my digital drafting board over a year ago. Seeing the physical manifestation of my engineering work gave me a deep, grounding sense of reality. The digital blueprints Vanessa and Bradley tried to take had transformed into thousands of tons of carved limestone and poured concrete. I utilized native root structures to stabilize the southern slope, preventing erosion and ensuring the longevity of the foundation. The design functioned perfectly. I parked my vehicle near the main entrance and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I grabbed my leather folio and walked toward the central pavilion. The cascading infinity pool operated flawlessly, filtering water through the subterranean irrigation system exactly as I had designed it. The imported Japanese maples lined the terrace pathways, offering shade and structure to the sprawling grounds. The sunlight hit the water, casting bright reflections across the stone tiles. I stood at the edge of the retaining wall and looked out over the valley. This was the exact spot Bradley had pointed to on my stolen tablet during his fraudulent pitch. He tried to claim this terrain as his own personal achievement. Now he lived in a basement in another state, navigating the early stages of a federal indictment. I stood on the actual stone, holding the final approved inspection reports. The stark contrast provided all the closure I would ever require. Richard Sterling walked out onto the terrace. He wore a tailored navy suit and carried 2 glasses of sparkling water. The catering crews buzzed around the lower lawns, setting up white tents and lighting rigs for the inaugural charity gala scheduled for tomorrow evening. Richard handed me a glass. "You delivered exactly what you promised, Aaliyah," he said. His voice sounded relaxed and satisfied. The structural integrity holds perfectly, and the botanical integration looks like it has existed here for 100 years. My wife is thrilled with the final result. I accepted the glass and took a sip. I appreciate the opportunity, Richard I replied. The terrain presented several engineering hurdles, but my team executed the timeline efficiently. He turned and looked at the cascading water. You know I speak with developers and contractors every single day, he said. Most of them try to sell me an illusion. They show me pretty pictures and hope I do not check the math. You showed me the math first. You operate with a level of precision that is exceptionally rare in this industry. The market always corrects itself when liars face the light, but true competence stands firm. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a sealed white envelope. He handed it to me. This contains the final payment for the project completion, he stated. I also included a performance bonus. I do not normally hand out bonuses, but I recognize exceptional execution when I see it. You protected your firm, and you protected my investment. We will be doing significant business together in the future. I placed the envelope into my leather folio without opening it. I thanked him, shook his hand, and spent the next hour walking the perimeter of the property to complete my final quality check. Every stone sat in its proper place. Every irrigation line registered the correct pressure. The ecosystem thrived. I walked back to my vehicle and sat in the driver's seat. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and looked at the sprawling luxury surrounding me. I built this reality through late nights, rigorous study, and unwavering discipline. My family had viewed my dedication as a threat. They wanted me to shrink so they could feel large. They demanded I sacrifice my stability to fund their delusions. I thought about Helen and Vanessa sitting in that cramped suburban house across town. They were currently living out the exact scenario they feared most. They lacked money, they lacked social status, and they lacked the ability to control the narrative. The country club friends stopped returning Helen's phone calls weeks ago. The neighbors whispered about the bankruptcy filings and the public eviction. Vanessa slept in a tiny guest room, surrounded by the cardboard boxes of her own failures. The most devastating part of their punishment was the profound isolation. For their entire lives, they relied on a third party to absorb the impact of their poor choices. When Vanessa failed a class, Helen blamed the teacher. When Bradley squandered an investment, Vanessa blamed the market. When they needed emergency cash, they planned to steal from me. They always possessed a convenient scapegoat. Now the scapegoat was gone. I severed the connection and locked the door. Without me there to absorb the blame or provide a financial cushion, they were forced to look at each other. Helen had to face the reality that she raised an entitled daughter who married a fraud. Vanessa had to face the reality that her mother could not manipulate the federal court system or magically restore her ruined reputation. They sat in that quiet house, staring at stacks of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. They stewed in their own bitterness, with nobody left to blame but themselves. The toxicity had nowhere else to go, so it turned inward and consumed them. They created their own prison cell and locked themselves inside. Society often teaches us that family loyalty requires unconditional forgiveness. People will tell you that sharing DNA means you must endure endless disrespect. They say you should turn the other cheek, keep the peace, and protect the family name at all costs. They are wrong. Family loyalty does not equal a blank check for abuse, theft, or extortion. Sharing a bloodline does not grant someone immunity from the law or protection from the consequences of their own actions. If I had followed the traditional advice, I would have remained quiet at the wedding reception. I would have let Bradley pitch my stolen designs to avoid causing a public scene. I would have paid the ridiculous hotel bill to keep Helen happy. I would have sacrificed my business, my reputation, and my freedom just to maintain a fake image of family harmony. I chose a different path. I chose to protect the empire I built. I did not need to scream at them in a crowded ballroom. I did not need to post tearful videos on the internet begging strangers for sympathy. I did not need to seek petty revenge or engage in endless dramatic arguments. Drama requires two participants. I simply removed myself from the equation and let the math solve itself. I documented the truth. I secured the digital evidence. I hired competent legal professionals, and I drew a boundary made of iron. When they tried to break through that boundary, I did not push back. I simply stepped aside and watched them run full speed into a brick wall of their own making. I turned the ignition key. The engine of my SUV roared to life. I drove away from the Sterling estate, leaving the completed project behind me. I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city center, where Mark was waiting for me. We had reservations at a new restaurant downtown and a flight to catch the following morning for our European vacation. My business was thriving, my marriage was strong, and my mind was entirely free of the anxiety that had haunted my past. My life belonged to me. I earned every single piece of it. For everyone listening today, I want you to remember this story. The next time a relative demands you sacrifice your peace for their comfort, do not let them convince you that your success is selfish. Do not let them guilt you into funding their poor choices. And above all, do not let them use the word family as a weapon to strip away your boundaries. When toxic people try to pull you into the mud, document it. Build a wall and let them drown in it.